Testing, can you hear me? Yes, now yes, okay. Okay, let's just start equitably, yeah, on time. So we have a small group today on Friday, and welcome everybody. Some of you are traveling from very far and already worked really hard for 1 week. So thank you for your participation in this summer school from GEOCLIC. So just to warm up the discussion, I will give a very small presentation about this project funded by funded by Erasmus Plus, what we are doing, where we are, and then a little bit about the summer school, what the students have done from 5 universities in the last few days. Then I will give the floor to our keynote speaker, Professor Kufer from Holland. And then we will have a moderator with the panel to discuss about climate change management from a women's perspective. I need to note that when the panel started the discussion, this will be, you see the cameraman. So the event will be live streamed, so there will be participants online from the partner university, etc., and the public. This event is also disseminated to the Brussels region for the institute that are helping the unemployed to find jobs. So I hope that there will be some participants. Let me think if I missed anything. Yeah, so I will start my little presentation. I will try to speak less because I tend to prolong my presentation. So it's actually not a presentation, a short, I hope maybe 5-6 minutes. So my name is Jonathan Chan. I'm with the Department of Electronics and Informatics in VUB since a couple of decades. So we have summer school is organized under the project GEOCLIC. GEOCLIC is short for Geoinformation Educational Resources for Climate Change Management. The objectives, we want to provide geoinformation technique and materials for CCM. We adopt a work-based learning approach because we would like to teach something that is usable for finding a job. And also we want the student who already get used to the working environment so that that's why we have a panel also from the private company today to have some interaction. We want to improve the employability for geoinformatics researcher. In particularly, we focus on the female researcher, young researcher in CCM. We want to enhance the digital competence, and at the end in this project, we want to have a EU license for the online course that we will be developed. So the priority on the EU level, Green Deal, sustainability, an economy that will work for people, digital competence in digital age. So these are the priority. So when you see the orange block and the green block, it is how we compile or align our objectives with the EU priorities. So you see the arrow, we will prepare, we will develop the MOOC, Mass Open Online Course with a 5 module. We will have a dissemination event like what we are organizing today, a multiplier event to disseminate. And then we will launch the program. We are also organizing 2 summer school and 2 winter school. So prior to this summer school, in March, we had the winter school in Freising near Munich, also 5 days. Probably you already look at the gallery and then you see the student in class working. Yeah. Then we want to apply for EU licenses and then to improve the employability of a young researcher. We are just in the middle of the project. We did gap analysis. We have a survey with a private company, public sectors, and also academia to see what is the situation. We generated a report on this survey. We have two joint staff training to understand what is online course, what is the professional way to generate online course. And this, of course, are very important in the last 2 years when we are under the COVID and then we cannot meet physically. So this is something that will be much more useful when we apply it in the climate change management. We had also 2 schools now. The summer school is finished, and then at the end of this year, we will have winter school in Croatia, and then next summer we will have another summer school in Valencia. So very interesting place and country to visit. For the summer school, we have a topic, urban climate. So I don't think I need to elaborate on this. Every day you are bombarded by the news around in the continental level. We are cooking, we are burning in different countries. So here I just want to point out some statistics, some figures. According to E3G, E3G stands for the third generation environmentalists. So they are a little bit younger, more progressive. So according to their estimate, if we do nothing, our cost, because of extreme weather events on the EU cities, would reach over 190 billion annually by 2070. So I was exchanging with my student. I said, 190 is a lot, but I don't really understand what it means, 190 billion. But I can give you an example. 2 years ago, we have flooding in Belgium and also in Germany. And then the insurance cost, the damage is estimated until now is about 2 billion. 2 billion, just in Wallonia. So this is some comparison we can think about. And of course, there will be projected, according to them, increase in frequencies and intensity of this climate-related hazard, such as flooding, heat waves, wildfire, and droughts. Then to do this, in order to adapt or to tackle, not directly, but we have to mitigate or do some kind of adaptation, then we can do vulnerability assessment to do monitoring. There are different ways, different models. Some are more indicator-based, and in our case, of course, we are thinking about spatially, two-dimensional. And this is more efficient if we are talking about big coverage assessment. This is just one example already in the Climate Adapt platform for some years. So we understand this hazard in several components. The first is what we are exposing ourselves to, the exposure. For example, very high thermal discomfort, very, very hot. But at the same time, in the urban environment, is the lack of green space. Or we have a lot of built-up roads, soil sealing that will absorb more heat. And then, of course, there will be more increased background heat and heat wave with the more reflection with a high rise. Then what are the weaknesses we have? The weaknesses, if we have a high share of vulnerable people, younger people, or rather old people, people, they have underlying condition, medical conditions. High share of low-income household, their socioeconomic status. If we have a high concentration of a population, so these are also sensitivity. And based on this, we can have some response capacity in terms of maybe we can increase the green space, we build less, and we have to have a commitment to tackle these climate change issues. These are all more on the administrative level. So with this, we can have some kind of vulnerability or index map, spatially explicit model. So heat island is very easy to express itself using this graph. I use the NASA's training program because I don't think I can do it better than them. So just if you look at this, then it's a very, very self-explanatory. So the temperature is always high in the urban area, in the city, and then it will cool down in the countryside. And then when later on we will look at some results generated by the student, it will be more clear. Classical classification using remote sensing data is land use, land cover classification. But since 2 decades, maybe less than 2 decades, I think it's 2012, this idea of land cover class, but related to climate change mitigation is suggested, and it is called local climate zone classes. And then you can see it is focusing on the description of the density and the morphology in the urban area. And then it has a lot to do with the formation of the heat island. So in this summer school, we are trying to introduce this classification scheme, and there is a very automated platform or portal. You don't need to do the classification. So it's a very, very friendly. You just produce the polygon, and then you can submit to the generator, and then it will generate the classification map. And it is easily put on the Google Earth, so it's very, very nice and handy to use. And this is what we produced this week from all the groups, Valencia, Zagreb, Nicosia, Munich. So this is the first step. But then we want to study the urban climate and the temperature. We also teach how to calculate the land surface temperature from Landsat data, which is a very developed parameters. We use this different land cover to extract the temperature. So then we can have some indicator. The first 10 classes are urban related, and then compare with the last 6 classes, and you can see the temperature in general. On the average, the natural classes have a lower surface temperature. And of course, if it is bare rocks, you see in this column, bare rocks and paved, and then the temperature will also rise. So this is what we generated, and comparable in different cities. Munich has a similar pattern. And this is just an impression of the temperature we generate, land surface temperature, and then the crop together with the city boundary of the local climate zone that they do the classification. So one thing we found out that is that while some cities are very similar, like in this case in Nicosia, if you look, it's the opposite. Yeah. It's not that in the surrounding it's hotter. Indeed, actually the surrounding, not the surrounding is cooler. The surrounding is actually hotter. What you see, all these red representing higher temperature. But in the city center, actually is cooler. So then it is something that we generate our interest. So because it's not our common understanding. So yeah, that's something we should think about. It's not all the same. The second thing they produced a nicer map. I forgot to include it. So each student have generated a map. And from this example, to show that classification is a subjective process. Because 4 students generate 4 maps, they are a little bit different. Of course, there are also similarities. So there are something that we learned from this exercise. This is a very nice result of the Zagreb group. And then you see in each of the class, each of the students have generated a map and results. And then we have the last, the red bar representing the average of their result. So in the next step, Marta, she is teaching us about how to we use Google Earth Engine with a time series land surface temperature, which is from MODIS, and then combined with socio-economic data. And then from this also we can have analysis about the temperature in the city. And but the classification you see here is a little bit more detailed and a little bit different, but they give us something that is similar. So what we did is trying to put all the cities with 5 cities. Here is Brussels is missing. So we have Nicosia, Munich, Zagreb, Valencia. And then we can compare of a different class. Here to the left side is urban-related classes. We try to compare with the local climate zone classes arrangement. And then to the right side you will see is the more natural classes. So some cities, for example, they are almost exactly the same. But again, you can see that in Nicosia it's a little bit different on the highest level. And this is the comparison from the 5 cities. They are logical. The results are logical. And then, as I explained earlier, we do have something different in Nicosia. And this is some open question. Maybe the student, they will explore a little bit more. Okay. So sorry it's still long, my presentation, I know. So it's just a brief introduction to what we have been doing especially for the panel. Yeah. So now I will give the floor to our keynote, Professor Coover.
And thanks for this wonderful overview. And you will see some of the topics also coming back in my slides. But leaving Europe, and I see also, I think, potentially some faces coming from other parts of the world. I will talk about deprivation, a concept which looks to multiple poverty. And then also with some later slides linking it to climate change, and asking the question, who is actually paying the price for climate change? And I don't know if you follow also global discussion. I think yesterday there was a very strong statement by the UN General Secretary saying the area of climate warming is over. We are now in the area of climate boiling, yes, indeed. And the question is, who is basically responsible, and who is now supposed to act? And I think it was already in the last COP in the climate conference, one of the strongest statements and outcomes was to say we need to push resources, funding into the South, global South, into low and mid-income countries, because they are paying the price for the climate change. But even more, things are not very even, and that's something which I will go to my slides. The situation is not very even in city of climate change and also how cities develop. Because you have the better parts of the city where people have the ability of having air conditioning, they have proper houses, so they can protect themselves to a certain degree, particularly when we talk about extreme temperatures. But other parts of the city, people don't have these abilities, and that's the parts which I referred as deprived areas. Many of my examples are now coming from the global south or low and mid-income country cities, but the same situation you have also in the global north. So the concept of deprivation, I don't know, does anybody know where the concept of deprivation comes from? Or like index of multiple deprivation, ever heard? It comes from the UK. If you go and Google, you will find the English deprivation, multiple deprivation index. You will find the Scottish, Wales, multiple deprivation index. And it's a form of the government to say how different are living conditions across the country. And it's also used to understand where municipal resources should be pushed into it, because these areas are deprived in terms of relative deprivations or relative poverty. So these are areas which are for example, have high income inequalities, have high unemployment rates, but also have very poor housing conditions, are very much contaminated places, have issues with air quality, etc. And that's basically mapped across the UK. And we have been using this concept to look to the global south, where data are typically not that easy available, and that will be a lot about my talk on how to make data available and how to generate data about variations of living conditions, variations of poverty, which I called deprivation. That's a very big overview, and it's just to show, let's say I'm working a lot on SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which are basically looking into the main concept and the main message is leave no one behind. And it's the main global challenge to promote equality and to reduce inequalities in living conditions. And I'm working on many projects related to various SDGs, of course being very much an urban person, an urban remote sensing person. I'm working a lot on SDG 11, which is the main SDG, where also slums informality is a very important aspect in it, but also to SDGs of climate change, on peace. We did work in Sudan on human rights, data for human rights, etc. Won't dwell too long on this. So when we look to the statistics of urbanization, we see that we have this massive increase of urbanization. We're talking about cities which are in a European scale unimaginable. Like imagine a city of like Delhi is expected to grow to 30, maybe 35 million people in the coming years. I'm coming from the small country of the Netherlands with 17 million people in one country. A city which is almost double the size as a whole country. The level of organization, the level of challenges, the level of inequalities, infrastructure provision, transport system provision, it's just beyond European imagination. And we also know that this growth of this expected growth, 90% will not happen in the areas we are now located in the high-income countries, global north countries, but in the south, where most of this growth will happen in areas which you see here on the slide, which are locally maybe called slums, informal settlements, with very sort of congested living conditions, high inequalities, poor services, infrastructure, etc. And cities are massively growing. That's, let's say, some of the work we did. I will show you a picture also of the now situation of Khartoum in Sudan. I think you're aware about the conflict and the massive displacement. But the country, and that's a sort of a symbolic situation, as many situations have been impacted by massive, what is called displacement. Displacement caused by climate change, by conflicts, which happened since decades, where people are moved into cities. Cities grow relatively rapid, because in the past, always the cities were the safe havens, where people could escape from rural environments, where a lot of violence, also the loss of livelihood conditions, declining agriculture income from products. So cities like in Kenya, cities are massively growing because people cannot have anymore their traditional rural lifestyles. Which, on the other side, for cities means they have to accommodate this massive growth in terms of services, infrastructure, and housing provision, which is typically failing. And that's what you see in many African cities I'm working, that people live in underserviced, non-serviced areas, poor housing conditions, often very prone to hazards, and massively impacted by climate change. And then, of course, this last aspect about inequalities in terms of gender inequalities, but also inequalities, like we do some work in Nigeria with people who have disabilities, and people don't have wheelchairs. They move around cities, people who cannot walk on skateboards, which it's shocking when you see it the first time, but on the other hand, it's also amazing because they have accessibility. And basically the main call is, we have been now working for 1 week on data for Europe. Europe is a very data-rich environment. Where data is really needed is in the south, because processes are rapid and data are typically lacking to support what I would call evidence-based policy making, which is important for various actors. Often decisions are made without data, and often poor decisions are made because of not having data. And that's a little example of a data system we built with local stakeholders for the city of Khartoum in Sudan, and we were planning to extend it, but in the moment this project is stopped. I've been now talking a lot about deprivation, slums, informalities, and these are all concepts very much related and very confusing. I think some of you might have been, who has been ever in a slum or an informal settlement? What was the most striking you found in terms of living condition? Sorry? Yes. So what you see on this picture is basically the housing condition. You typically see like housing materials which you would not feel yourself very comfortable to live in. It's typically iron roofing materials, mud houses, that's also very common. But also the whole concept of, so maybe let's start. The concept of a slum is from UN Habitat defined as a household concept. So it's basically a household who lacks water, sanitation, is overcrowded, lacks tenant security, and of course also the housing conditions are not adequate. While the concept of an informal settlement is an area level concept which we as Earth observation scientists can map. We cannot map, of course we can map a household, but we don't know whether the household is connected with water. And what we very much advocate, adding to the global statistic, is the area level concept of informality to have a holistic understanding of deprivation. And that's what we are doing in many related projects around what we call the tree of idea maps, which stands for Integrated Deprivation Area Mapping System, which looks to many aspects of mapping, but also aspects looking to some climate change aspect. For example, what we do with Onikana, which looks actually to urban heat islands, and I'll explain later a bit more. And it's our open network, so if you're interested in deprivation area mapping, it's open for everybody to join. What we do in Idea Maps is we bring different mapping traditions together. So we have basically always working very much in silos, producing data on individual case studies, but never really putting the community together to produce global data sets. And that's still really very much lacking, to have a global actionable data set on informality that can be, for example, overlaid and combined with data on climate change, on heat exposure, on flood exposure, etc. We have been many years ago, we have been presenting at the UN General Assembly and put together with UN Habitat a proposal which was declined, because we wanted to get a specific funding targeting to the increasing the resilience of the urban poor in the context of climate change. And the main question was, the main problem was, we did not have a solid database saying how much the urban poor are more paying for climate change impacts as compared as other citizens of the global south. And that's something we want to really change with producing such a global data set. We want to produce evidence saying you cannot leave this millions of people alone. We're talking in Africa about more than 60% of the urban population living in such area. So that's the reason why we are putting a global community together from different mapping traditions, coming from the field-based mapping of community mappers, census-based, survey-based mappers, digital imagery, mapping traditions, as well as computer-based modeling, where we try to produce global data sets that speak to the local community as well as to the global community for producing evidences. And that's basically what we do in Idea Maps. We are putting together data, a data ecosystem. I'll show you later on also some examples. But that's, again, the concept of multiple deprivation. So multiple deprivation means we're combining data sets of different aspects at different scales of deprivation. On a household level, saying households typically have poor housing condition, have issues with inequalities, with income, etc. So we are compiling all kind of available data sets per city, scanning city per city on household levels. Within area level, we are typically combining globally available national data sets, looking to aspects of contamination, like air pollution data, which you can use, for example, also like we have somebody from Copernicus here, like Sentinel-5P as a very simple proxy of NO2 pollution, which you can put as a first approach of air quality, aspects of hazards, unplanned urbanization. I think you did a lot with Marta on mapping urban morphology. That's basically what is done within unplanned urbanization, mapping building arrangements, density, irregularity, and social hazards and aspects. For example, access to streetlights. I'll show you later example which has been flagged very much in stakeholder engagement, that access to streetlight is a very strong indication of security, and particularly a strong concern for women not having streetlights available to navigate in outdoor spaces. How areas are connected with the rest of the city in terms of infrastructure provision, in terms of services, healthcare provision, schools, etc., and the aspect whether sort of communities have governance links are part of participatory processes. So we put all this type of data together to make diagnostics about flood risk, about health outcomes, about environmental aspects like temperature. And we combine this in city-level gridded maps for each domains, also subdomains. It can be aggregated, disaggregated to specific aspects, but also having overall diagnostics where are the most deprived parts of the city and where are the least deprived parts. It can be locally grouped, if necessary, into the slum, non-slum situation, overlaid with population estimates to also contribute to the SDG reporting on slums, informal settlements. How many of the inhabitants are living in slums, informal settlements? I'm speeding up a bit. So we are running this in the moment, we are doing this as pilots for 3 cities in Africa, for Lagos, Kano, Nairobi. We took Kano because it's one of the secondary cities, and we know that most of the studies are done on primary cities. Kano is a very complicated city because it's in the one of the conflict impacted zones in North Nigeria of Boko Haram, and we wanted to have also a more complex city in our model. We will expand it to then a further city, and then hopefully we want the final goal is then to expand it to a global data set. Part of it will be a lot of engagements, participatory modeling approaches, local engagement, also with NGOs, but also with local governments. And that's what you see is this whole modeling framework of feeding data into the system from Earth observation, from globally available openly geospatial data sets, citizen-generated data sets, data sets coming from local authorities, feeding them into a model system, so not exact locations, but also to be able to combine data sets in a model. And then having feedback cycles from local stakeholders to improve data sets and to add and to deal with errors. In a associated project, Idea Atlas, where we work very much on the SDG reporting, because that's work we do together with UN Habitat to see how much we can use Earth observation data to document SDG 11. It comes from the main question of UN Habitat that presently the data sets are full of uncertainties because of data come from local estimates, which are sort of often having no spatial dimension and are not have some potential also political influence, let's say it like this. And therefore we want to have like a global transferable method to estimate for each city the amount of informal settlements. We are building this on openly available data sets using Sentinel data sets combining Sentinel-1 and 2. And we are running in the moment pilots for this 8 case study cities, but hopefully also then expanding it to other parts of this globe. Another important aspect is the combination of Earth observation data with citizen science data. Because often, and that's what you see, in a big warning flag for the young generation. If you map Earth observation data, go to the field and check what is on the ground. Don't stay behind your computers. Because then you get this question like you have on Nicosia, why is the surrounding hotter? One explanation, because I know the same situation also from Indian cities, like from the city of Ahmedabad. The problem is also the Sentinel data sets. They're recorded at 10:30 in the morning. And typically, particularly very hot and very cities in arid environments, the cities have a lot of shadow on the cities because of the houses at that moment, while the surrounding area does not have a lot of shadow in very arid environments. And there you often have the situation that the city in the morning is cooler than the surrounding when the sun is just starting. So really go to the field, talk with people, understanding the local conditions. And that's what we are trying to do a lot also with our deprivation modeling, that we combine perception, like in this study, combining the perception of local citizens in slums, where they compared images for us. We asked them, what is the better and worse location to live? And we had more than 1 million comparison of images. And we trained a deep learning network to predict this, the perception based on satellite images. And that's basically the result you see is the agreements and the disagreements of the algorithm, which had like a quite sort of solid result of around an R-square of around 0.8. Living conditions, like we had talked before about the massive accumulation of waste studies, and that's one of the outcomes a lot on the local engagement. You cannot imagine if you walk in a community, in an informal community, maybe, I don't know how visible the pictures are in the right corner, the massive amount of waste accumulation is everywhere. Kids play in the waste. It's everywhere, and we were trying to map it. We mapped it also with local community groups in the field, in the moment producing maps together with local community groups to document the massive waste accumulation in the field. This is what you see in the red highlights are where the waste is the major hotspots of the waste accumulation, the map on the right. And that's basically what you see. Maybe it all follows the drainage system. So what is happening if it floods, and it's flooding more and more, is the waste is accumulated in the drainage system. The drainages are blocked because of the waste. The flood is getting more severe. After the flood, all the kids are ill because the flood is very contaminated. The water is very contaminated. They have typically diarrhea, other forms of bacterial infections, etc. And yeah, there's no solution. Like communities are trying to deal, but just imagine you live in a house and nobody picks up your waste. That's the living condition of 60% of the urban population in Africa. And we're trying to build, let's say, data systems of producing. That's like, I think if the presentation is shared, you will find this also an online data system where all this data are compiled in terms of a gridded system, systems showing the deprivation conditions, population estimates, which are also very uncertain in these communities, as well as the environmental conditions like the waste accumulation. Oops. So now coming to the multi-hazard, and that's something which we see more and more, that cities, they are impacted not only by one sort of hazard, but by multiple hazards. Extreme temperature, floods, storms, etc. And communities, they don't have, they're not prepared. They're trying to prepare themselves. Last month, I was in Nairobi talking with colleagues from Slum Dweller International, and they're very aware about the future and the threats. And they're trying to collect themselves data. They're trying to develop strategies themselves, how to deal with the threats of climate change. And that's something we do with our colleagues from close by, with ULB, funded by BESPO on extreme heats, saying that Africa is sort of the epicentrum of extreme temperatures. We need to deal with it because of the housing condition, metal roofs, which is like open during the daytime, but also getting very cold in the night, because typically like Nairobi is at a high altitude. So people in the wintertime, they're getting really cold under this, iron roofs. We are trying to compare, data on urban morphology, similar what you have been doing with information about satellite-based information, to say how much people are exposed, what is the level of exposure, where are the hotspots, and how much is the thermal inequalities. And combining it with population estimates, which is another big problem. If you look, for example, I think I've maybe noticed one Indian face, no? Yes, no, maybe no. Somebody from India, no. Yes. If you take, and the city I've been working with, Mumbai, if you take the biggest known slum in India, the Ravi, and you overlay it with the global population models, you will find that the Ravi is estimated with 50,000 inhabitants. 50,000. How many people are living there? Locally estimate. So the local estimates go to 1 million. 50,000 compared to 1 million. And that's what you see, the uncertainties in global population models. And that's what we also try to see how we can improve better population models for these extreme high density situations, because they're not included in any models. And if you use this population data for exposure modeling, you get big errors. In contrast to what you have been using, which is Landsat, we're using another source of thermal images, which is EcoStress, which is on board of ISS, the International Space Station, which has higher resolution and also has it's not, of course, it's not a regular mapping approach, but it allows us to have images at different times of the day, which is very valuable if you talk about temperature variations. Not only like you have with Landsat at the morning hour of around 10 o'clock, I think 10:30. And that's what we are trying to do. So similar what you have been doing also. So we are comparing images about urban morphologies and urban, what we call morphological deprivation, which means high density, irregularity, with variations in temperature, and looking to daytime temperatures, where you see basically the deprived areas, here more or less in whitish, are hotspots during the day. But they are also cooling down dramatically during the night. And this, of course, depends also to the seasonality of the year. But generally what you see is that the people living in the deprived areas are much more exposed to urban heat. But we want to go further than only mapping the land surface temperature. We are installing at the moment sensors with a local NGO, Code for Africa, as well as we do transect walk with citizen groups with local sensors to record the temperature on the ground and see whether we can model from Earth observation data and artificial intelligence-based models the air temperature and the variation of air temperature in communities. if you allow me, I think I'm already over time. Another hobby of mine is nightlight remote sensing. Now, I only have a few slides on this, which also relates to other aspects of inequality. We were talking before about streets and not having street lights, and the big impact of security in the global south. We're working with an ESA project on nightlight, and we are aiming to propose a new nightlight mission for the European Space Agency of more higher resolution nightlight data. Why? Because many of my colleagues working also on other topics like sky glow or the aspect of animals and night active animals and the disturbance during extreme light, what we have here, and Belgium is one of the hotspots in nightlight data. But we will work on access to electricity and stability of electricity. And just an example, like if you have ever worked with nightlight data, so you see here this example from an old type of nightlight data, very coarse resolution, and the newest generation of nightlight data, which is VUB, which is now a massive improvement in terms of resolution. You have new satellites up, which have higher resolution, like SDG-1 which provides 40-meter nightlight images. And that's something we need to assess the access of electricity. Here again, the situation of Khartoum before the conflict. And we want to know how the nightlight situation is in this area. But if you use VUB, you have no clue what is the pattern of nightlight. If you use the nightlight images from ISS, from the International Space Station, at 20 meters, you see at least the patterns of nightlight access. But you also see the massive destruction, like in the case of a conflict. So that's Khartoum before the conflict, and that's Khartoum now. Here was the city center, the airport, something you might have seen in the news. Most of the city center is off-grid. And basically it was a city of 7 million people, approximately, where most of the inhabitants are now without electricity. We also know that existing estimates, global estimates, like estimates of the World Bank, are possibly very wrong. Because if you go to data of them saying, oh yeah, about more than 90% of the urban population in Nigeria has access to nightlight, electricity. And you look into the situation on the ground, no. And basically people, maybe if they have access to electricity, it's maybe 6 hours per day, not 24 hours per day. And that's what we want to document and map with nightlight data, the stability and the existing electricity. And we know that access to electricity and, for example, GDP is very highly correlating. So particularly the least income country have the least stable access to electricity. And yeah, that's some experiments saying how much actually spatial resolution we need for different mapping if we want to map, for example, access of streets being connected, having street lights. And we basically conclude that we want to have a resolution of about 10 meters to be able to say, has a street access to electricity? Another interesting topic on electricity is the energy shift, saying coming from conventional lighting bulbs to LED lighting, which is going to the blue. And that's something we can globally map. And we can globally map the reduction of energy, energy saving lighting technology on a global scale. Good. My last slide is, and it's basically just a few highlights saying it's really important, data are important, and Earth observation data are important for capacity development, bringing data out beyond Earth observation scientists to governments, to NGOs. We need to think about how to promote and how to stimulate societal change, making inequalities visible. But also when we talk about artificial intelligence-based algorithms, they're often full of biases. We need to document the biases. We need to explain. We need to think about explainable AI. AI, sorry. And basically to support evidence-based policy. One initiative together with UN Habitat are making such data documentable and using fair data principles, the Earth Observation Toolkit. And thanks, and sorry for being maybe over time. And my question was, how can you use methods you learned this week to map aspects of urban deprivation? So that was my thought. I was looking to some of your material and was thinking, okay, I want to learn to see what new methods you learned, which could maybe help us to explore aspects of urban deprivation. Can be also in the global north. So a difference between day and nighttime population, which is, I think in Europe you can do such models, but typically most of the population models are only looking to the nighttime population, and often this difference is huge indeed. Maybe you have questions also to me, but about the density, I'm agreeing, like density is a very strong indicator, often a very simple indicator also about deprivation. Together with irregularity, but of course also, we have this, I think there were also some architects in the group. And I think architects have a very different concept about what is good and bad in terms of density. Because basically density is something we need. High density, we need high density to have efficient transportation. If you go to the super low density areas, then you have a problem. You have also a problem of land consumption, of sprawl. So there's a long discussion about what is like a sort of a good density. What density is acceptable? What density should we aim for? I think as a starting point, I've been also doing a recent study on Europe, and that was a question from my colleagues from the European Commission saying, how can we measure slums informality in Europe? It's a total non-discussed topic, but it exists. Yes. 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 So the question was, how do you define slums, informal settlements, inadequate housing? So the indicator talks about slums, informal settlement, inadequate housing. Inadequate housing is defined by the percentage of households spent for housing. The threshold is 30%. Most German cities are inadequate under this, I guess also for Belgium, because most households spend more than 30% on housing. So basically, if you take this, like whole Europe would need to be, many parts of Europe are inadequate. But you have, of course, also housing conditions, and basically you have like, you can also like, there are famous examples like, are you taking the housing which were built maybe in the 50s, 60s, which are very sort of degraded housing conditions where people have very high poverty rates, where you have issues of mold, like the nice fungus growing in on your walls, the black things on your walls. This are like in Sweden. This is a measurement of deprivation, and or the amount of sleeping rooms per family member. So, so you have in meanwhile Eurostat is moving to European measurements of deprivation. But of course you have extreme examples like in Madrid, the very famous settlement along this street. But you have other forms like East Europe. You have many of the Sinti and Roma settlements, which are extremely deprived. Municipalities, they build walls. Like in Romania, they build walls that people don't see the settlement behind. So they make them invisible. There are also studies like settlements, like in Serbia. I don't know exactly the figures, but it's about that of the Roma and Sinti settlements or other tribal settlements, about 50% of people are not connected with sewage and water systems. You have, of course, this very famous smaller settlements, like in France. You had it like the Jungle of Calais, or you had the famous settlement in Paris, along the railroad line, which was also like a settlement of immigrants, of also I think Roma and Sintis, which were removed a couple of years ago. You have all around Europe, you have settlements, refugee settlements, but also settlements of poorer people who cannot find housing, like the famous caves which emerged in the Spanish economic crisis. We have this in Europe, but they're not debated. And the big question is what you include in European studies. And basically, what I wanted to go then, people living in such deprived living conditions, they have much less ability to deal with climate change. They have like very congested housing conditions. They have poor ventilations during summertime. It was also like during COVID time. I know it from many Spanish cities. It's hot. They were not allowed to leave the houses. They have very congested housing conditions. So how to deal with this in future when you have more and more very hot days coming up? So it's also some... Yes. But the question is also, does Belgium have slums or informal housing areas? You have, let's say you have, for example, also settlements like which are shed housing. Shed housing, like where people... yeah. Trailer housing, yeah. So trailer parks, but also where people living in structures which are not meant for residential uses, like for example, like industrial sort of workspaces, like that's called shed housing in the UK. There are some studies on that. Mm-hmm.
Day and night, how much time, how many times we can, expand this measurement, as well as when we are going to a global level. Now we have the capacity to have a very, very nice data very fast. So we are also dealing with this in the last few days, because in Lancet we have 30 meters data, for example, and then in Google, then it's 1 kilometer or so. So there are certain discrepancies.
In the land surface temperature, you mean?
Land surface
Yeah. Yeah, basically one thing always, like if you hear a Landsat 30 meter, no. It's recorded at a different resolution. It's resampled to 30 meter. And Landsat is sort of, it's seen as let's say it's an easy accessible data set, and it's a lot of algorithms exist to convert to temperature. But it's also a problem because it's recorded at the morning hour, which is not at all the best time to detect the urban heat island effect. So typically urban heat island studies, they look to the difference between daytime and nighttime temperature. And typically what is particularly impacting human health is extreme heat at nighttime. Because, like, if you also from your own experience, in the evening hour, you want to go to bed to sleep, and in big cities, it's like an oven, and the temperature is not dropping. In the surrounding area, the temperature is already dropping, and cooling down. The city not, and that's basically the urban heat island effect that you suffer during hot summer days that you cannot sleep, and the ability of not sleeping is most harmful for humans. Of course, like if you're during daytime, if you're in cities with 45 degrees during daytime, this is extremely challenging, and particularly for people with preconditions. So therefore, a lot of climate studies, urban climate studies, is done with MODIS, because MODIS is recording at several times per day, but it has a very coarse resolution. And that's the reason why we use EcoStress, because it's not systematically recorded, but it provides images at different times per day at around a resolution of 70 meter of the recorded resolution. It's like anything with ISS. It's typically they try to record cities, but it's not like a satellite, because it's basically it's a measurement station attached to ISS. So it's recording, and it's, I think, to my knowledge, data available for any city. But there's no control about, oh, I want to have at this specific date. It's not like a controlled environment like a Landsat. Yes.
Maybe not switch it on all the time. Just when you switch.
Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm very happy to be part of this really interesting panel full of women researchers on climate change management. I think we will have a really nice conversation related to also the topics that Monica has already discussed. But let me start with introducing each other. So I will start with Alessia Mauta. She's an experienced satellite operation engineer with a deep insight into the development and maintenance of complex satellite system. She joined RIA System Luxembourg as a Satellite Operations Service Manager in July 2021, and she is currently leading a team of experts on SESIN and Geography Information System, working on an Earth observation satellite for the Luxembourg Ministry of Defense. But prior to this, she was part of the spacecraft analyst team at Inmarsat, and she has an astronautical engineer background and experience in spacecraft operations, both in the satellite operators and manufacturer. So welcome, Alessia. Thanks for being here. Then I will move to Monica, that she has already presented herself alone. But well, I just want to say that she's associate professor at the University of Twente in the Netherlands. And as she already said, she has led a lot of several research projects on urban deprivation and environment. And she's also a member of the steering committee Earth Observation Toolkit for Sustainable Cities and Human Settlements. So thank you, Monica, again. Then we move to Martine de Masiere, that she holds a PhD in physics from the University of Antwerp. After a postdoc at the Natuurkunde Laboratorium of the University of Amsterdam, she joined the Royal Belgian Institute for Space Aeronomy, and she and her team contribute to European environmental research infrastructure and to global atmospheric monitoring networks among the international network for the detection of atmospheric composition change, of which she is also co-chair since 2013. And since mid-2011, she is acting general director of the Royal Belgian Institute for Space Aeronomy, and she's also a member of the Royal Flemish Academy of Science in Belgium. Thank you, Martine. Then I will move to Anne-Catherine. She is a project director of AI for EO, contract with the European Space Agency, and she has a master in bioscience engineer from the Catholic University of Leuven, with a focus on Earth observation. She has worked as a service development manager, developing satellite-based ice monitoring at Kongsberg satellite service from 2011 to 2015. And afterwards, she started at Space Tech Partners, member of the network of the European Association of Remote Sensing Companies, where she was in charge of training and information sessions of the EU Copernicus program at the Copernicus Support Office. Thank you also for being here. We also have Marta Zapena. She is graduate in engineer in geodesy and cartography in 2014 from the Polytechnic University of Valencia in Spain. In 2020, she obtained her PhD in geomatics engineer from the inter-university program between the Polytechnic University of Valencia and the Polytechnic University of Madrid. Her thesis was awarded with the 2021 European Spatial Data Research Award for the best PhD thesis related to geoinformation science. And from 2014 to 2019, she worked at the Geo-Environmental Cartography and Remote Sensing Group at the Polytechnic University of Valencia. And in 2018, she was a guest scientist at the German Aerospatial Center, where she is currently working as a postdoctoral research. And finally, we have Christine Wingen. She is a physicist, PhD here at the VUB, and working at the Royal Belgian Institute for Space Aeronomy since 1996, where she is studying stratospheric aerosol from satellite datasets. She participated to several large European Space Agency projects and more recently for the Copernicus Climate Change Service. And she's actively engaged in promoting a more inclusive workflow for all forms of diversity and gender equality. In 2019, she started the first Belgian initiative, Volks Science Brussels, aiming at the promotion of women in science and their research at STEM. And in June 2021, she took part in the creation of Gender and Diversity team at the Royal Belgian Institute for Space Aeronomy. She's also a contact person for her institute in the Gender Equality Diversity Network of the Belgian Science Policy Office. So, after all of this, as you can see, we have a rich background of experts on climate change management. And I will start with few questions, but I think that it's also interesting that if I make a question for you, that you also comment on other people's response. So then we can make this conversation more a kind of conversation rather than one-to-one questions, if you agree. So please feel free to interrupt each other and be more in this logic from your own positions and maybe from your own expertise in the topic. I will start with a question to Martín and Marta. What do you think that are the main challenges faced by women in actively participate in climate change management in terms of Earth observation, but also decision-making process? Maybe it's a huge question, but we can start like this if you want.
Well, maybe I can try to start. So I don't consider myself as a climate change manager for the moment. I am a manager of the Institute and I am a climate scientist, but not really a climate change manager. So, but from my experience, I would say in climate change management, you come into contact with politicians or with high-level people or whatsoever, and I think still for women it's sometimes more difficult to get heard. You feel a little bit inhibited maybe to speak aloud against men or against other people. But I think education is very important for all of this, and getting educated equally and being, in an environment where you are really considered equal to others and where you get this feeling of not only being treated as equal, but where you feel equal and where you get this attitude of being more assertive and don't feel inhibited to speak. I think that's very important. And so I think that really the clue in all this is in education and training from childhood, from really young age, to get recognized and to feel strong. I think that's important. But I have to say, as a scientist, I never felt a difficulty to be in a scientific community as a woman. But I think it's more difficult when you get into management environments, because there it's still more use. You are more confronted with a male environment up to now. And I would also want to add that what I'm saying here is probably not only true for gender aspects, but also for all the people that have impairments, the minority people and so on. So I think we should enlarge this discussion and this topic to a more wider idea of everything related to diversity and not only sticking to gender aspects. I think that's very important. And I think that Monica also talked about impaired people, and also in the context of climate change, women may be affected differently, but also impaired people, minority people, and so on. So I think that's very important. I will stop
Yeah,
here.
Marta, maybe you want to also
I can
elaborate
add
a bit.
something. So I completely agree with what she said. I think education is one of the main issues, and it's really, I also think, like traditional gender roles, like women might think, or like young girls, that, oh no, I don't want to study a technical job or like a scientific job and so on. That hinders a little bit that at the end we get into leadership positions, and at some point the ones making the decisions and supporting management are the ones that are leading projects and decision making. It's like, and we are less represented in these areas. I think now young students, the girls are choosing more technical jobs, but maybe in the future this is a good thing, that in the future we will have more female in leadership. But right now there is like a gender gap, I think. That's clear, but also what you said, like minorities or race, or like we come from a very diverse world and we need to be represented to have different opinions, non-biased decisions, and I think that's very important, and that can be, that you have to start with capacity building projects, with education and things like this, because it's really also having some role models from women to see, I'm also able to do something similar, I want to do it. It was really impressive to see Monica presenting her work, and having people like this that you can see yourself reflected, it really helps, that women will be involved into climate change, and by studying the consequences you really see how difficult is this topic and you want to contribute. So I think this is a process that will help women to get more involved.
Yeah, I don't know if someone wants to add, for example, to the idea of education, or maybe so that
Martin, you mentioned the problem also of diversity, and for instance, people with an impairment. Actually, you have this problem of double discriminations, and so this is very important. If you consider gender aspects, actually you have to consider what we call intersectional aspects. So there are a lot of discrimination for women. There are a lot of discrimination for black people, for instance. If you are a black woman, you have this double discrimination. And so this is even more difficult. So it is always a dimension that you have to carry, to take into account. Actually, for the discrimination, indeed, education is very important. But of course, you have discrimination increasing in the whole career. So you have, maybe you know this, there is a famous diagram of the gender Lead pipeline. So it's really, if you take into account the amount of men and women at all the stages of the career, actually during the studies you have more women. And then it's increasing until for bachelor, master, and then you reach the point of PhD. And then there is a change, and from the postdoctoral position towards the professor and all these steps, you have really a decrease. And so you have to take into account, of course, to address this problem for the whole career. So maybe I will stop here for the moment.
No, thank you. And Katrien?
Maybe to add to that, I think this week we saw a very good, or in my view, a very good example of this, potential discrimination or the barrier that minorities face with the appointment of the head of the IPCC. And I'm no expert, and I did not look in depth at the CVs, but I saw a news article where the 4 candidates, the 2 men, the 2 women, one woman who was also black, so double discrimination, as you mentioned. And they just gave a description of the four people, and what they wrote about the women was like, oh, she's been active there, she has this background. It was really impressive. And then for the men, and especially the man that has been elected, he's a professor at Imperial College, which is impressive, but it was nowhere near, or it didn't sound to me as impressive as what those women had achieved. And I think that's where, for me, it shows a little bit that women, as maybe going further in their career, have to work twice as hard and be twice as good as men in order to be taken as credible and getting the same opportunities. And I think the solution for those kind of things might be that you focus also on quota and making sure that you force people to look at what do we need to change in order to make sure that we have more women in growing also throughout their career, and that young women see then those women as representing themselves, so that in 20 and 30 years we have this natural inflow of minorities.
Yeah, for example, Alessia, what do you think, for example, in terms of the private sector, that you are more related to that? Do you think that a female perspective can contribute in sustainable commercial solutions, for example, related to climate change? Or what is the role that women can play, for example, in private sector to adding, I don't know, more value, as Anne-Catherine was saying, for example?
Yeah, I think private sector and research, university sector aren't that much different in this context, unfortunately. I think we face the same kind of challenges. I also agree very much that probably we shouldn't focus just on, let's say, the women or female struggle. There is many others probably that should be included. And also I think that there is actually another side of climate change and gender, is also the fact that we live in a society that's been it's genderified, in the sense that we have like product for women and product for men, and overconsumption, and in a way we're all humans, so possibly we could use all the same things. I don't need the pink one or the blue one to. So that also it's another interesting topic. But I think for my personal experience and professional experience, the more diverse you bring around the table, the better it is. You just create more discussions. There are more ideas and hopefully maybe even better solutions. So, for example, in the team I'm working in, there's all kinds of backgrounds in terms of social or economical and professional and female, male. It's a whole. I think diversity is actually it helps maybe bringing solutions to the table.
Yeah. Monica, maybe you can also reflect a little bit on the education level, because you are a professor. Maybe you can also reflect a little bit on this. Yeah.
No, I'm just maybe to add. I think, and then coming to your question, I think I don't have statistics, but I think in universities we are doing very, very poor in terms of gender equality. Maybe much worse than in the private sector. I don't know, but let's say looking to Dutch universities, and indeed the same situation. Like at the student PhD level, the situation is very equal. But if you go to the level of full professors, the situation is very, very different. And you have maybe sometimes only 5%, 10% of at the top level are female. And you had like also sometimes radical decisions, like the University of Eindhoven, they stopped hiring men for a certain period, which was very socially debated decision, because it's of course another level of discrimination. But they were saying we have to do something, we have to be proactive finding a solution. And which comes more back to I've been also involved in committees where people are hired. And I think we are doing at universities particularly poor in this, because typically you hire people which are equal to you. So if you have a committee of the majority of men, then it's very likely that another man. If you have a committee of white men, it's a likelihood is very high that another white man is hired. And people are not prepared in committees. I've never been in a committee prepared, and that's the first time I was prepared, because I was in another situation with the European Commission, and they were sending me materials and video and training materials about unintended biases and how to deal with this in selection processes. And basically, I think we all not looking into what is our bias, because we find good what is equal to us. That's human. But we are not even reflecting on and helping each other to reflect to higher diversity. And I think that's what we need to go to look to, because diversity is where we can gain, where we can innovate, and particularly in universities. The education, I think, is key, but also, let's say, in the Netherlands, you have a society which seems to be very equal, but then you get very much the situation, like I have 2 kids, and I'm working full-time, and this is seen crazy. But if you work for a university and you don't work full-time, your assessment is not based upon that you maybe work 60% and your academic output should be 60% lower as compared to a man. So it's a very unfair system. And typically, even in the advanced Dutch society, the majority of the children education is done by women. And I think we need to change this. It's a long way, but we still have to go.
Yeah, but I would like to say something about your point about the 60% of output compared to 60% of employment. I agree with that. But I think it's all a matter of roles in the society. If we start changing the education also for the men, that they have to take on the same roles for taking care of the children, taking care of the household and so on, then they will also work only for 60% maybe. And then I think it's a really gradual evolution that we have to start with good education where we really promote equality in every aspect of society. And as soon as we get all these people involved in higher committees and elections, I think, as you say, we will get more and more inclusive and diverse. And I think if we come back to climate change management, what you told also what you touched upon in your talk is we have to involve the local people and the whole diversity of local people in the gathering of the data, and then in the whole process of defining taking decisions about the measures that have to be taken, about how to deal with the data, how to interpret the data, because then we have this perspective from different sides, and I think the solutions will also be more diverse and more applicable to everyone if we involve the people from the start. And I think citizen science in that aspect is very important.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, and Christine, for example, how can Earth observation policies and programs be designed to be more gender responsive and inclusive, considering the diverse needs, perspectives, and priorities of women in different regions and communities? Can, for example, change? Like, do you think that this could be like the female perspective on this can, for example, change the field? Or I don't know if this is a vague question, but
Well, I think there are different aspects. We have spoken about education. I think that one important aspect is that you have to show women. Women have to be visible, and for the moment that they are not very visible. Actually, it's a problem for all the STEM. So STEM is for science, technology, engineering and mathematics, so the hard science, let's say the hard disciplines. There is really a deficit in women, and one of the worst fields is geoscience for the moment. And so we have to increase the visibility, and I agree with what was said that the only way to force it is to have a systematic to put at the agenda that systematically the ratio man-women has to be considered in all aspects. If you have a board, you should have a gender equality. If you have a conference, you should have an gender equality in the speakers, in the conveners, in the chairperson, and so on. Also in the panels. Here we are all ladies. Why are we all ladies? Because it's a session about gender aspects. If you have a summit, or if you have a conference with a general view about general views about something, if you have 10 men, it will be okay. Nobody will see it. If you have 10 women, it will be not normal. Probably people will think, oh, they didn't succeed in finding the good expert. And so this is really an important thing. You have to show women. And so this is a reason why I think that it's very important to put at the agenda also for individuals. For instance, very common situation, peer reviewing. You are asked to make a review, you don't for some reason. You are asked to propose an expert. I propose 2 experts, 1 woman, 1 man. And actually if you do this, at the beginning you can think really that it's tough because you are used to propose the big names, let's say, and those are often men. But if you do the exercise, you will see that it's very possible. There are studies that show that in conference, if you organize that actually women are less asked, but if you look at the curriculum vitae at the publication list, there is no reason for that. But conference, you want to have the best speakers, so you take the big names, the big chiefs, and in most cases they will be men. So this is an aspect. I think you have to increase awareness, because the big majority of people are of goodwill, but they are not aware of the problem. And so it's really important to have awareness campaigns about these aspects. And actually, a few weeks ago, at the BELSPO, so the Belgian Federal Science Policy, organized a formation for all the hierarchical lines about gender and diversity. And it was really an opportunity to put the topic in the discussion. So I had discussions with a lot of colleagues. Most of them were surprise where, well, it was the first time that I could have such kind of conversation. And actually, it brings a lot because people becomes aware of the problem. So this is another aspect, increasing awareness. It is also, I think, important to realize that it's not men against women. It's not a fight between genders. It is about gender equality. And actually, the problem is not men. It is some conception of the masculinity. And actually, everybody is suffering from this kind of masculinity, not only women, but also men. And actually, men can be the best allies of women. So you have really to make this distinction between the problem of gender discrimination and men against women. This is very important, I think. I will maybe stop here so that other people can speak.
Just a small addition. I remember like an anecdote from a colleague, and maybe the same also here, because we have to follow certain compulsory, but we should follow every year a training course at the university ourselves to gain new knowledge, and training courses like management courses, etc. And there's one famous course, and I haven't been doing it myself because all my female colleagues, and I'm working in a network of female colleagues, which is EU for All, which is exactly trying to increase gender equality. In an institute which is Earth observation, traditionally, let's say we have many men and very few female, which changed also over the year positively. But this course, academic leadership, has, and that's what I heard from my female colleagues, it's very much teaching male attributes to women, saying you have to be successful and following the role model of men. And that's also the question, do we want this? Do you want to sort of train ourselves to have typically working with male stereotypes of being sort of overconfident, typically a woman in a job interview, if you have like a situation where you ask for a skill you're not totally up to, a man will say, yeah, I can do it. And he thinks, okay, I'll learn it, how to do it. A woman will say, oh, I've been doing this and this in this field, but I'm not fully competent or comfortable because I still miss the knowledge and the expertise in this field. What is better? What type of quality we want to have in our future generation? Do we want to have people who are basically open, saying, okay, I feel comfortable like to learn it, but I don't know it in the moment, but I really want to learn it. And I think we should evaluate people much higher who have the courage to say, I don't know it so far, but I want to learn it, as a person who is just making a big story about it. The person knows everything. And that's also maybe a change of what are our role models in academia.
Yeah, that's true. And then, Katrien, based on your professional experience, are there some successful examples from different countries or regions in Europe that demonstrate the positive impact of female participation in Earth observation? Or can you? I don't know.
I don't have an example of specifically of a country or a region. Or specifically on Earth observation. I do get the feeling, so I worked in Norway for several years, and I have to say, when I first started working there, I almost fell off my chair the first time one of my male colleagues with kids walked past at 2 PM and said, sorry, my kid is sick and it's my turn to go and pick him up from school. Because this whole Scandinavian model of the way that they manage childcare, maternity, paternity leave, really does make it a lot more equal. Women or parents, when they have a baby, they get 12 months and they distribute it amongst the parents. And then you see that also the man in that case takes 6 months off. So you then immediately also reduce this whole concern that employers have about, okay, I have a woman and she's going to give birth and then she's going to be away for a long time. But it makes it unequal because the man is also going to be away for a long time, and that makes it more acceptable.
But you came from the private sector. What do you think, like those who came from the public sector or academia, do you think that this, for example, is maybe
but I think, if I may interrupt, even in Belgium we are making progress in that sense, because when I started at the institute and I gave birth, I had 10 days of holidays or something like that, or 3 months, and my husband did not have anything. But now for all the employees, it's also like you say in Norway, they also have time to take off for the child. They have also the rights to go to take leave for parent as a parent. So I think we are moving in the right direction. Maybe it's a little bit slow and we are lagging behind, but at least you see that there is an evolution, and I think that's important to see that we are moving towards the right direction.
But beyond maternity leave or paternity leave, beyond that, like, for example, for children that they have 6 or 7 year old, do you think that it is the same, like mothers and fathers are involved in the same direction rather than just the leave, I mean?
Yeah, but I think that's what I already mentioned. The roles of men and women in society must become more equal, and I think it's part of education. Again, it's from the start. Also, making sure that people realize that things have to be done in the family, and it has to be shared. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, if I can just add another anecdote from the private sector, and the reason why I think we need to change the roles from the beginning and the awareness, and tell girls and boys that they can just do, if they want to do math or they want to make bread, it's equal. They can do whatever they want. To, let's say, to push for having more women in a company I worked for, there usually are referral programs, so you can refer a person that you know, and you get an economic incentive for that. And so the incentive was twice as much if the person was referred was a female. And this, of course, put a lot of controversy and another bias then, because of course now the male employees were upset about this new rule, and I agree this is not the way of doing it. I mean, in a selection process, things should be just equal. The best person gets the job. So I think it's a tricky situation, and companies are trying to patch it as they can, but it's probably not, let's say, it's not the solution. I think probably the solution is way back.
Maybe if I can, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Martin, and then we can move to the audience and we can collect 2 or 3 questions. Yeah?
You asked for a specific example or initiative. It's maybe not exactly what you asked for, but very recently I saw a message from NASA, who are funding dedicated projects for universities, for example, to have to make a course or a curriculum really dedicated to minorities or to women or something like that, where they really give an incentive to universities to take that initiative and to set that up, and I think that's an interesting initiative. And it was done by NASA in American universities. I think, if universities get that kind of stimulus, they can really pay more attention to it for the educational curricula. So I thought that was a nice initiative.
Yeah, it's a good example. So we have already one hand here. I don't know if you prefer to okay. If you prefer to, then we have to move to the table, and then we come back to the audience again. So go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I will give the micro to Jonathan for the second question.
Second question.
Yeah,
question first. Okay.
Yeah, we can connect.
Okay. My thinking was getting away because I was trying to understand the question. Okay, I can express a little. I feel a little bit shocked myself when I heard the Christine's comment, and then I was thinking, indeed, it is my first time to see a full female panel, and then it's something very different. In fact, if you don't mention it, I do nothing about it. But you are correct; that is something very unusual. So that is one feeling that I share with you. The second is a more abstract, is that I do not think too much about a gender issue myself, perhaps because I don't have that issue. Maybe I don't feel the discrimination you face. But let's say related to climate change management is a big issue now. Is there a gender perspective into this? How do we treat climate change? Is the policy thinking perspective now that is leading us that we should think that is too man-oriented or too narrow? Is this the case? And then the last question, in fact, is I have a feeling I'm surrounded by actually female colleagues. So I would feel a little bit surprised if that the equality is not met. But obviously, perhaps I'm wrong. I mean, maybe my perception is wrong. And I also feel that a lot of technical colleagues, they are actually female now. I mean, when I visited Slovenia, I went into a remote sensing company. In one partition, there's all women. I thought, is this a gender balance lab or something? Because they really show that there is a balance there. So another question is, in the market, in technical geoinformation market, in climate change, what do you see as is a lacking in terms of skills, in terms of I don't know if I explained correctly. Yeah, what is lacking in this technical field?
Okay, so maybe I just answer some of the comments regarding the studies, like why women, we have better grades and all those things. I think this is very related to what Monica said, like at the end, or some of my colleagues, they said like at the end we need to, or we have the feeling that we have to make a bigger effort, that we are treated equal. And when I was studying, always the best grades were my female friends and sometimes myself. And at the end, we just try to study harder because we think it's more difficult for us. And maybe this is a result that at the end, women have better grades. But also, for example, when I was doing my PhD, I was in a room with other PhD students and we were only 2 girls and the rest were all males. So I think you realize more when you are a girl and you go to a room to have a meeting and everyone else is a man and you are the only woman, you start to feel a little bit, I miss someone here. So because you always feel at the end better when you have people like you around. So yeah, just look around. I mean, I'm very now lucky in my team. It's quite diverse and we have people from different countries, from different gender. But for example, at DLR, it's a very technical job and it's from the STEAM science. And at the end, you always walk around and you see men, mainly white men walking around doing science. So it's not equal, and at the end, it's not only about giving equal opportunities, but we need equal representation. Because, for example, when we do statistics or research, we always say, I want a balanced sample, a representative sample of my population, but we don't have that in our, I don't know, panels or in our policy making. At the end, there are more men from certain countries, and then it's not representative of the population, in my opinion. So this is what we need to fix now, that at the end we don't have to continue talking about this every time, but we really need to have representative people in decision making. Also, for example, with climate change, I'm working in a project about migration and displacement in Africa, and of course the consequences of climate change are not the same for men and women. Women have different consequences. Many women have to migrate and go to the north to work because of the husband is at home with the farm, and so there are different consequences and it affects differently, and the vulnerability is different. So you also need to make studies focusing on gender because it's different. You cannot generalize and it's not the same. So there are many directions to really differentiate, not only on making decisions, but also when you are doing the research. Like a basic example is like sometimes diseases, we know the symptoms for men, but not for women because the research was done with men. So this applies to many other fields and also in climate change. Many questions more that I don't remember anymore, but maybe my colleagues do.
Coming back to what you said about women work harder, I recently read a statement that says we as women, we are supposed to act as a man we are supposed to look like a lady, but we have to work like a horse. So I think that's coming back to what Marta says. About the composition of this panel, it's really indeed nice that we are so many women, but I would have preferred to have some men in the panel, but that's my own feeling. And then about your statement that you are surprised to hear about discrimination. To be honest, I never felt any discrimination towards me. I worked hard and I had maybe, yeah. But I didn't feel any discrimination, to be honest. So I don't always share the view of Christine in that respect, but I can just talk for myself. But I had to work hard, indeed.
Probably it's more the equal representation.
Yeah. And to come back to the comment of your colleague behind you, I agree with you. I think that the ceiling glass, as you call it, is slowly breaking, but it takes time. But I feel like we are going in the right direction, and it's a bottom-up process, so it takes time to get there, but I think we are moving in the right direction. Which does not mean that we should not continue to promote this, but I think there is some evolution.
Yeah, Monica.
How to phrase it now, not to be too provocative. I think it depends on the context, whether you feel discriminated. I don't know how many women had ever this situation, you say something and people, more or less ignore you. Your male colleague says the same, and everybody says, "Oh yeah, that's true."
That's true. Yeah.
And it depends, of course, to the context. And I'm working often in what you also saw in my presentation in very different societies where women have a very different stand. For example, I was extremely positive surprised, and I had arrived with all my pre-conceptual, pre-assumption to Sudan, and and it's a very conservative society, and I found so many women in top position and very outspoken, and I was totally amazed about the situation. So I'm not saying now about, don't want to make now stereotypes, but if you travel in some societies which also have insecurity, and particularly in the evening time, as a female sort of researcher or also maybe as a private sector, as a woman, you have you're more careful. Like there's a meeting at 10 o'clock in the night in a sort of difficult, accessible area. You're not as easy as a man going there. You will always think about much more on security issues. Of course, men are also, of course, exposed to insecurity, but for women, there's another level, which often restricts you in mobility, in access, and also in connections. If this might be an important meeting and you're not you're scared to go there. And maybe a final comment, and I'm not a psychologist, but I have 2 kids, and somehow they have survived me, so far at least. I'm not sure about the first 2 years, and that we all have to stay at home for 2 years. I didn't do this. And I think there are also different concepts of life. You also have sometimes now 2 men raising up a child or several children. Like my neighbors are 2 ladies raising up 2 children. So you have different forms of families now and different roles. And I think we need to also leave our stereotype thinking about like I'm coming from Germany. In Germany, a woman has to stay 3 years at home, else you're a very bad mom, because your child will be mentally distorted if you don't do so. But women decided not to do this, and I think it's you have also to see with your child how much the child is able to go out. Also with 1 year, my kids went with 6 months to the daycare, like a couple of days per week, and for them it was really good. It was good for me, it was good for my kids, which doesn't mean that we don't have a strong bonding. You have different forms of life and diversity in it.
Yeah, I have just a comment, if I may, because it was a direct message to what I said. You have a point about the idea that the nucleus family is changing. What I was referring to was not stereotyping, I was referring to research. And this is something quite different. I was not referring to societal stereotyping, I was referring to research. Now, I understand that nowadays we have different forms of life and different forms of families, and we have to deal with it. Fine.
Maybe I can also ask, so you mentioned the research said that the mother is the most important figure in the first 2 to 3 years, which is linked to breastfeeding. So there are some biological reasons for that. But do you then imply that it means that the mother should be staying at home? Is that how is her importance? How does it? How is it implemented? Let's say, is it by being there 24/7 for the first 3 years, or is it by I don't know, being there full time for the first 6 months, and then also learning, because that's also what a baby needs to do as it grows up. It needs to learn to detach from the mother, and that it's no more a part of her body. So that's also a process. So that's maybe a nuance that I want to make. Does it then really mean staying at home, or are there other ways of being the most important person?
Yeah, let's going to collect 2 or 3 more questions, and yeah. Wait, because I have to give you the mic, right?
Hello, my name is Anna, and I wanted to make a comment about the thing the professor said. I think not many girls are studying right now, like interested in engineering, because right now you as women, like you are right now like getting higher positions, and we are seeing it right now, but before we couldn't see that. So we just have to we have to wait until the new generations, they are going and they are seeing examples of how far they can go, and they are looking at it, but they're still studying, like just keep waiting. For example, in my school, until last year, the directors and every single teacher mostly was women. So we had that example. But that happens everywhere. Like right now we can research, we can go on LinkedIn, we can go on Instagram, and we see women as engineers, as scientifics, and that didn't happen before. So it's normal that right now there are not that many girls interested. So that's all. Thank you.
I just want to ask, they say the more representation from women now. How about the money? Like, how is the money situation? Maybe now there are more women, but are they paid as much as men? What is your experience on that? Mm-hmm.
Okay, who wants to start?
My microphone is open. Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself.
You can continue.
Sorry, I don't know the exact statistic, but if you Google the Equal Pay Day, I think it's typically like it shows the massive inequality in payment. I don't know the exact day, but you see like women typically work at a certain day for free for the rest of the year because they are much less paid for the same position.
Also something maybe to add is like at the end in general, women are the ones reducing their working hours when they have children. And I think also this reduces, of course, the salary, even if at the end you get the same payment per hour. And many times if a family cannot afford to pay the daycare and the woman is the one making less money, it's also the one who will quit the job and take care of the baby. So there is like a chain of things having an impact on that. It's not only how much we make per hour or something, but at the end, in general, women make less money. It's like there are statistics. I also don't know the numbers, but it's, yeah, maybe not.
No, I don't know the statistics, but I do see, so I work in recruiting for my company, and I do see that men are, well, I think it's more overconfident in what they can expect as a salary than women. So I would say to women, don't ever undervalue yourself.
Okay, so maybe we can finish here. Yeah, okay, because we said like more or less. But thank you very much for this fantastic panel. I think that. Okay, we have a. Okay.
So I think the panel, and then also you work very hard for the whole week, and let's have a pro to finish this week. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So now let's have a break, a long one.